You probably can't buy a tire here, hero.
It will never be worth the price my comrades paid.
And you'll pay with what? Medals? Veteran humiliated at car dealership. Then he buys every car. Sir, the toy aisle is 2 blocks down. Chad snickered, flicking his eyes from the scuffed work boots to the Purple Heart pin on the old man's chest. Unless you're here to dust the cars, you're lost. Prestige Motors glowed like a jewelry box. Bladed chrome, glass polished within an inch of vanishing, the ORM V12 gleaming under a halo of showroom lights. Into that cathedral of excess stepped Walter Brewster, 72, in a weathered plaid shirt and sun-faded ball cap. His hands, knuckled and scar-mapped, looked like they'd once held something heavier than leather steering wheels. He moved with the quiet economy of a man who'd learned to conserve breath in places where air came at a price. Kevin drifted over, sizing him the way a bouncer sizes trouble, quick, clinical, dismissive. "You're looking," he said, the words stretched thin as a wire. "But you're not buying." Walter's gaze tracked the ORM's long hood, the mirror of its lacquered black paint throwing back a ghost of his face, lined, steady, unembarrassed. "I came for that one," he said, nodding at the V12. His voice carried the soft gravel of a riverbed. No tremor, no apology. Chad barked a laugh that bounced off glass. "That one starts at $250,000, and you'll pay with what? Medals?" He jabbed a finger at the Purple Heart, the cheap shot landing with a hard metallic clang in the hush of the room. A couple browsing an SUV paused. A receptionist looked up, then down, deciding she wanted no part of a storm. Walter didn't flinch. He set a small dented tin on the car's fender, an old tobacco case polished by decades of pockets, and opened it. Inside lay a few folded photos gone soft at the creases and a ribbon bar dulled to velvet. He touched the tin, closed it again, then slid something else onto the paint. A jet-black card whose edges swallowed the light. Chad's grin faltered. Kevin leaned in, pupils tightening. The card was one of those myths that salesmen told each other after closing. No limit, no ceiling, a passport to absurdity. "I'm not here to dust anything," Walter said, the calm now edged with command. "Ring up the ORM." He let the beat hang, then added, as if it were an afterthought that might break the room in half, "and then ring up the rest." The showroom stilled. Even the air conditioning seemed to hesitate. In the glass, the old man's reflection stood beside a line of cars worth more than most houses and looked exactly like someone who'd never needed any of them and could take them all. Prestige Motors was designed not as a dealership, but as a shrine. The marble floors were polished until they reflected the rows of vehicles like mirrored lakes. Spotlights hung from the ceiling, each beam engineered to kiss the bodywork of the cars. Sleek European coupes, hulking American muscle, exotic prototypes gleaming like predators at rest. A faint scent of leather and ozone lingered in the air, mixed with the sharp bite of cleaning chemicals. Everything about the space whispered wealth, speed, exclusivity. Against this backdrop, Walter Brewster looked like an intrusion. His plaid shirt was soft with years, sleeves rolled just enough to show forearms grooved by labor. His jeans were plain, the knees whitened with wear, and his boots carried the patina of gravel roads, not showroom polish. The Purple Heart, pinned above his pocket, glimmered faintly under the LED light, a modest emblem in a temple devoted to spectacle. Walter's eyes, though, were the only luxury in sight. They were a steady gray, pale like ash left cooling in a fire pit. They didn't dart with curiosity like a tourist's, nor glimmer with hunger like a buyer's. They scanned with assessment, a soldier's eyes measuring terrain. Every movement he made was economical. The way he shifted weight onto one leg, the way his hands clasped behind his back. Those who noticed could tell this man wasn't lost. He was simply patient. Chad Morrison strutted in stark contrast. 28, hair sculpted to a blade's edge, suit jacket tapered tight at the waist, he carried himself like the cars themselves existed to mirror him. A Rolex peeked from his cuff, its face angled just so, meant to flash in light. Chad had a salesman's smile, wide, fast, designed to overwhelm before doubt could creep in. He thrived on the instant calculus of who belonged in Prestige Motors and who didn't. Walter, by every metric Chad worshipped, was in the wrong temple. Kevin Lee, his partner, was subtler, but no less dismissive. Younger by a few years, quieter, with a kind of lean frame that looked better beside a sports car than inside one. He had been raised on numbers, leasing options, interest rates, performance stats, and trusted those more than instincts. The plaid shirt and scuffed boots told him everything he needed. This man wasn't a buyer, he was a waste of time. Where Chad's cruelty was open flame, Kevin's was frost, aloof, efficient, disinterested. Other characters floated in the periphery. At the reception desk, a young woman tapped through emails, the practiced rhythm of someone trained to smile on cue but never intervene. A couple in tailored clothes studied a hybrid SUV, murmuring to each other in low tones, casting the occasional glance at the unfolding exchange. The showroom manager, Bob Hammond, remained in his glass-walled office, blinds tilted just enough for him to survey the floor like a warden. He was mid-40s, hair graying at the temples, and he carried the nervous weight of someone whose livelihood depended on quotas set by men far wealthier than him. And then there was the ghost who wasn't present yet, Marcus Sterling, the dealership's owner. His name appeared on brass plaques and on glossy brochures tucked into walnut cabinets. Sterling was Detroit royalty, a man who had risen from manufacturing contracts to an empire of dealerships and investments. He rarely appeared in person, but his presence was felt. His rules, his reputation, his obsession with prestige. The cars themselves played roles like silent actors. The ORM Vice 12 gleamed at the center of the stage, its hood stretching like a predator's snout. A limited edition, hand-assembled $250,000 beast meant not to be driven, but displayed. Its paint was deep enough to drown in. Around it, a Ferrari Spider lounged in cherry-red arrogance, while a Cadillac Escalade loomed like a fortress on wheels. Each machine was more than steel and chrome. They were symbols of entry, of belonging, of wealth, paraded as power. Into this world stepped Walter, the anomaly. To Chad and Kevin, he was a disruption to the theater, a flaw in the showroom's choreography. To the bystanders, he was almost invisible, another old man wandering where he didn't belong. Only one detail betrayed the truth: the medal pinned to his chest. A small, quiet signal that his life had been measured in battles, not in banknotes. That pin was both his shield and his target. The tension lived in the contrast. A room engineered to showcase perfection, money, and youth was now forced to reckon with scars, age, and sacrifice. The staff laughed because they didn't know what else to do. The onlookers stayed silent because silence was safer than confrontation. And Walter stood calm because he had survived worse storms than ridicule. The stage was set. The old soldier, the arrogant salesman, the indifferent crowd, and the glittering altar of machines. Only one truth had yet to surface, that the man in plaid had built empires, carried ghosts, and walked into this shrine not as a beggar, but as its judge. Chad circled Walter like a wolf, scenting easy prey. His loafers clicked against marble as if punctuating every jab. "So, which one caught your eye first, Grandpa? The V12? The Spider? Maybe the Escalade? Plenty of trunk space for old lawn chairs?" Kevin snorted, glancing at the receptionist, inviting her into the joke. She lowered her eyes, choosing silence. Walter didn't answer. His posture was still, hands behind his back. Silence irritated Chad. He thrived on reactions, embarrassment, defensiveness, anger, anything but this unnerving calm. "Look," Chad said, raising his voice so the nearby couple could hear, "we've got brochures, full color, big pictures. You can take one home and tape it to your fridge, pretend it's yours. Or maybe frame it. Hey, Kev, can you fetch the man a frame?" Kevin smirked, playing along. "Only if we have one that matches his boots." Laughter crackled between them, sharp, mean. It spread to the couple near the SUV. They exchanged a glance and a thin smile, not because they found it funny, but because they didn't want to be mistaken for siding with the wrong man. Walter finally shifted, not in anger, but to adjust his grip on the small tin case in his pocket. The gesture made Chad lean closer, predatory. "What's in the box? Snacks? Pocket change? Oh, medals, right?" He pointed at the Purple Heart pinned to Walter's chest. "You'll pay with what? Medals?" The words rang like a slap across marble. The receptionist flinched. The couple froze. Even Kevin looked sideways as if Chad had gone too far. But Chad pressed on, intoxicated by his own cruelty. "Tell you what," he said, snatching the ORM's key fob from its display. "Why don't we take it for a test drive? Of course, if you can handle more than 20 miles an hour without a nap." He dangled the fob in Walter's face, smirking. Bob Hammond, the manager, finally emerged from his glass office, muttering under his breath. He didn't come to stop Chad. He came to manage optics. "Gentlemen," he hissed, "let's not waste time. We've got real clients." He glanced at Walter like one would glance at a smudge on glass. "Sir, perhaps this isn't the best dealership for—" Walter raised his head. For the first time, his voice carried past the sales floor. "Ring it up." Calm, low, but with steel. The words sliced through the sneers. Chad blinked, thrown. "Ring it up?" "The V12, Walter said, eyes fixed not on Chad but on the car itself. "And after that, the rest." The room tilted. Silence spread. The couple by the SUV lowered their brochures. The receptionist sat up straight, suddenly attentive. Kevin swallowed, eyes flicking to the black card now lying flat on the ORM's polished hood. He recognized it instantly. Chad, refusing to yield, forced a laugh. That's not real, no way. I've been in sales 7 years and never—" "Enough," Kevin muttered. For the first time, there was unease in his voice. "Chad, look closer." The black card absorbed the showroom lights, its platinum lettering crisp and undeniable. A card without limits. A card issued to fewer than 1 in a million. Chad's smirk faltered. Walter placed the dented tin beside it. The contrast was deliberate. One box gleaming with infinite wealth, the other carrying ribbons and photographs worn by time. "These," he said, tapping the tin, "are the reason that card exists. Men who never came home, lives traded so I could live one. You mocked them." The words weren't loud, but they carried like a gunshot. Every scar on his face, every crease around his eyes, testified to truths beyond the showroom. Bob Hammond cleared his throat, sweat beading. He had seen plenty of eccentric clients, plenty of imposters, but never a man who spoke with such terrifying certainty. He glanced at the card again, recognized the insignia embossed in one corner, an insignia reserved for those with assets that could buy entire corporations. His stomach dropped. "Mr. Brewster," he stammered, voice cracking, "please allow us to—" But Walter was already walking toward the next car, running his fingers across its fender. "Ring them all," he repeated, voice calm as command. The staff stared, frozen. The showroom had turned into a stage, and every witness knew they were watching the humiliation of Chad and Kevin unravel in real time. Their mockery, once so loud, now sounded like children taunting a storm before it breaks. He had been barely 19 when he first set foot in the A Shau Valley, a stretch of green hell in central Vietnam where fog clung to the ridges like ghosts and the ground swallowed men whole. His platoon had been tasked with holding a ridge against an enemy 10 times their number. Walter remembered every face. Morales, who carved small figurines out of bamboo. Henderson, who carried a photo of his baby girl folded inside his helmet liner, and Captain Rowan, who never let the men see him afraid. On the 5th day, the ambush came. Mortar fire rained down, shattering trees into splinters. Men screamed. Walter felt the ground erupt beneath him, his body lifted, ears ringing. He should have died. Many did. But when he pulled himself upright, through blood and dirt, he found half his platoon buried in a collapsed trench. No officers left, just him. He had no training to lead, no right to give orders. Yet something in his chest refused to yield. He dug bare-handed through mud, dragging Henderson out first, then Morales. He seized an M60, abandoned in the chaos, and laid down a wall of fire until reinforcements clawed their way up the ridge. For that day, for the men who lived because he would not let them die, he received the Medal of Honor. But medals could not silence the faces of the ones he could not save. When Walter came home, America was not ready to welcome her sons. He was spat on in airports, called names he could not repeat. So he slipped quietly into work, first as a truck driver, then as an organizer of routes, then as the founder of a logistics company that grew mile by mile into Brewster Holdings. He never hung his medals in his office. He never spoke of the war in interviews. Shareholders called him a genius for streamlining global supply chains. But Walter knew it was nothing more than battlefield instinct applied to commerce. Anticipate supply lines, adapt under fire, never waste a resource. By the time he turned 60, his company stretched across continents. By 70, he had stepped aside, leaving daily operations to others. But money never filled the hollow, where voices of lost comrades still echoed. Only one thing ever had, his daughter, Emily. She had been born when Walter was already 50, a miracle he hadn't expected. Bright-eyed, stubborn, she grew up racing down hallways with toy trucks, demanding bedtime stories not of princesses, but of heroes who fix things. At 7, she fell ill. Leukemia. Walter marshaled every doctor, every treatment, every dollar. He fought the disease as if it were another war. But cancer obeyed no supply lines, no tactics. When she passed, the strongest man who had once stared down 1,000 enemies wept until he could not breathe. Before she died, Emily had whispered, "Daddy, one day build a place for kids like me, A place where they can ride in cars, not ambulances. A happy place. It was the one mission Walter had never completed. Walter opened his eyes in the dealership. His breathing steadied. He looked at Chad and Kevin, both pale now, the swagger drained away. He looked at Bob, shifting uneasily. "You think I came here to prove wealth," Walter said softly. "But wealth was never the point. These medals," he tapped the box, "they cost more than money. They cost lives. And every dollar I earned after was bought with those lives. You ask me what I pay with? I pay with memory." No one dared interrupt. Even the hum of the showroom lights seemed to pause. The receptionist swallowed hard. She had tears in her eyes, though she didn't fully understand why. Walter turned back to the ORM V12. Its lines gleamed under halogen beams. Beautiful, but empty. He thought of Emily's face, of her dream of cars filled with laughter instead of fear. "This isn't about engines," he said. "This is about what they carry." Bob, trembling, finally found words. "Mr. Brewster, we didn't know." "You never asked," Walter replied. The sting of truth landed harder than any reprimand. Chad shifted his weight, guilt finally cracking his arrogance. Kevin looked down at his shoes, ashamed. Walter pocketed the black card, leaving only the dented tin on the hood. "Ring up the cars, every last one, but they won't stay here. Tomorrow, you'll drive them someplace that matters." The staff exchanged glances. The couple by the SUV stood frozen, realizing they had witnessed something that would be retold far beyond these walls. For Walter, it was only the beginning. The silence in Prestige Motors stretched taut, like the moment before a rifle shot. Everyone watched the old veteran, waiting to see whether his declaration had been a bluff. But Walter's eyes, steel gray, unwavering, told them he never bluffed. "I'm not here to own toys," Walter said, his voice carrying in the vaulted showroom. "I'm here to finish a mission." Bob Hammond, the manager, swallowed hard. "Mr. Brewster, of course, we'll honor your request. Every vehicle can be yours within the hour." Walter raised a hand. "Not within the hour, tonight. And they won't be delivered to my estate or to Brewster Holdings. You'll take them to the address I provide." Chad finally found his tongue. "Sir, with respect, that's at least 24 cars. Where exactly are we delivering them?" Walter's gaze fixed on him, and Chad felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken battles. "To the National Children's Hospital, Wing C. You'll sign them over to the non-profit trust I've arranged. From this night on, they'll serve the transport program for sick kids and their families. Every last vehicle." The room gasped. Kevin stammered. "You mean those cars for patients? But these are six-figure machines." "Exactly," Walter cut in. "Children battling disease deserve to ride like champions, not victims. My daughter wanted that. She wanted cars that carried hope. So now you'll help me give it." Bob's voice cracked. "We'll deliver them personally, sir." Walter shook his head. "Not you. Them." He gestured at Chad and Kevin, the salesmen whose laughter had been daggers only moments before. "You two will drive the first cars to that hospital, and every weekend for the next month, you'll volunteer there. No excuses. You will see the courage it takes to fight battles without guns or medals. And maybe then you'll learn what respect means." Chad flushed, shame flooding his face. Kevin nodded quickly, almost desperate for redemption. The dealership's glass doors swung open, and a couple of mechanics hurried in from the service bay, wiping grease from their hands. They had heard enough to know something extraordinary was unfolding. One of them whispered, "He's making them deliver to the kids." The word spread like fire, soft but powerful, and soon the showroom buzzed, not with sales chatter, but with reverence. Walter turned back to the ORM V12. "This one," he said quietly, "will bear her name. Emily." For a moment his composure cracked, and grief, raw, fatherly, eternal, crossed his features. Then he straightened, the soldier once more. "You have your orders," Walter told him, the cadence of command unmistakable. "Carry them out." Bob bowed his head. "Yes, sir." The mission had shifted. This was no longer about humiliation in a dealership. It was about redemption, about a dying girl's dream, about transforming luxury into legacy. And from that moment, Prestige Motors was no longer just a showroom. It had become the staging ground of something far larger, a convoy of hope. The night air outside Prestige Motors was sharp and cool, carrying the faint tang of autumn leaves. Headlights blazed to life in unison as the fleet of luxury cars purred awake, their engines humming like a symphony of restrained power. For years, these machines had been symbols of vanity, gleaming trophies for those who wanted to display wealth. But tonight, under Walter Brewster's command, they were being transformed into vessels of purpose. Chad slid behind the wheel of the first ORM Va-12, hands trembling on the leather steering wheel. Kevin settled into the driver's seat of a cobalt blue roadster, his throat dry. The irony was unbearable. Hours earlier, they had sneered at this old man, and now they were being sent on his mission like chastised recruits. Walter stepped into the lead car, not as a billionaire client, but as a commander overseeing the convoy. "Keep your spacing," he said firmly. "No showing off, no racing. We're not parading wealth tonight. We're escorting a promise." The mechanics who had gathered around the dealership watched in hushed awe as the convoy pulled out of the showroom. Neighbors came to their windows, filming with phones, whispering that something strange and beautiful was happening on Detroit streets. At the entrance of the National Children's Hospital, nurses and security guards blinked in disbelief as the line of exotic cars rolled up to the curb. For a moment, they thought it was some publicity stunt, but when Walter stepped out, his boots echoing against the pavement, everything changed. "These belong to the hospital now," Walter announced, handing a folder of transfer papers to the bewildered director. "They're not cars anymore. They're chariots for your kids." Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Parents who had been waiting outside with their sick children watched with wide eyes as the vehicles gleamed under the fluorescent lights. A boy in a wheelchair whispered to his mother, "Is one of those for me?" Walter knelt to the boy's level, his voice steady but tender. "Yes, son. You'll ride to your treatments like a champion. That's what my Emily wanted." The boy reached out, brushing the cool metal door handle with his thin fingers, and smiled for the first time in weeks. The next morning, Chad reported for volunteer duty, wearing a borrowed pair of scrubs. His cocky smirk was gone, replaced with nervous uncertainty. Nurse Sarah, who had overseen pediatric care for 2 decades, greeted him with a clipped nod. "You're the one who laughed at the veteran?" Chad swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," she said. "Then you've got more to prove than the rest of us. Come on, the kids don't need charm. They need presence." Chad followed her into the playroom, where children with IV poles clustered around puzzles and books. One little girl tugged his sleeve and asked, "Mister, can you read this to me?" She held up a dog-eared picture book. Chad hesitated, then sat down cross-legged on the floor. His deep salesman's voice, once used to pitch horsepower and finance plans, softened into the cadence of storytelling. The children leaned closer, giggling at his silly impressions. By the end of the day, Chad realized he hadn't thought once about commissions or status. He had been wholly absorbed in the laughter of children. Kevin's trial was different. Assigned to the teen ward, he initially struggled to connect. The teenagers eyed him with suspicion, an outsider in their world of needles and endless waiting. But when he pulled out his phone and launched a video game, a boy with a shaved head perked up. "You play that? Better than you," Kevin teased instinctively. Minutes later, the room was alive with competitive shouts and laughter. For the first time in months, the teens forgot about their pain. And Kevin, usually reserved and calculating, found himself laughing louder than them all, rediscovering a joy he thought he'd lost. While Chad and Kevin struggled through their transformation, Walter spent evenings in the hospital chapel. Alone in the dim light, he laid Emily's old stuffed bear on the pew beside him. "Emily," he whispered, "I did it. They'll ride with hope now, like you dreamed. I can't bring you back, but maybe I can give other kids the future you deserved." His hands, scarred from battles long past, trembled as he held her photo. For decades, he had hidden behind wealth, avoiding the raw wound of his daughter's death. But now, with the hospital buzzing from the miracle of new cars and fresh attention, he felt something shift. He had turned grief into service. The public revelation word of the bizarre dealership incident spread rapidly. News outlets swarmed the hospital, eager to capture footage of Ferraris and Bentleys ferrying children to treatments. Commentators debated the symbolism, a billionaire veteran shaming arrogance and redirecting luxury toward compassion. At first, Chad and Kevin dreaded the cameras, fearing the world would know their cruelty. But as weeks passed, reporters began to highlight their transformation. Parents praised them, nurses vouched for their sincerity, and children asked for them by name. "They're not salesmen anymore," Nurse Sarah told a local news crew. "They're drivers of hope, and that's worth more than any paycheck." One rainy evening, Chad was assigned to escort a frail boy named Lucas to his final round of treatment. The boy asked, "Do you think I'll be strong again?" Chad's throat tightened. "Yes, Lucas, stronger than you know." The boy smiled weakly. "Then promise you'll be here when I ring the bell." It was the hospital tradition, ringing a brass bell at the end of treatment. Chad promised. When the day came, Lucas stood on shaky legs and rang the bell with trembling hands. The ward erupted in cheers. Tears streamed down Chad's face as he lifted the boy onto his shoulders. For the first time in his adult life, Chad felt proud of something that had nothing to do with money. Kevin had his own breaking point when a teenage girl pressed a friendship bracelet into his palm. "So, you don't forget us when you leave." He stared at the woven thread, realizing he didn't want to leave. By the end of the month, Chad and Kevin asked Walter if they could stay on permanently. "Not for prestige motors," Kevin said. "For the kids. We're done selling cars. We want to drive them for something that matters." Walter studied them for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he nodded. "Emily would have liked you." 2 years later, the hospital unveiled the Emily Brewster Children's Transport Program, funded by Walter's fortune and staffed by dozens of former dealership workers who had followed Chad and Kevin's example. Luxury cars gleamed in the hospital garage. not as symbols of excess, but as beacons of joy for children facing the hardest battles of their lives. And every time the engine started, Walter could almost hear his daughter's laughter riding with them. Prestige Motors had once prided itself on exclusivity and arrogance. The glass showroom gleamed under spotlights, and salesmen strutted like minor royalty. But the story of Walter Brewster's humiliation and his unexpected redemption of Chad and Kevin had turned the dealership into a symbol of everything wrong with shallow pride. Within days of the viral headlines, the dealership's reputation collapsed. Customers canceled orders, unwilling to be associated with a place that mocked veterans. The Sterling family, owners of the chain, scrambled to do damage control. Marcus Sterling himself appeared on national television, apologizing profusely. But it was too late. Chad and Kevin's downfall had already unfolded in the public eye. Clips of their sneers at Walter, captured on hidden phone cameras, circulated alongside footage of them delivering cars to sick children. Commentators mocked them as arrogant clowns, then marveled at their unlikely transformation. The men who once represented contempt were now forced to embody humility under the world's watchful gaze. For weeks, the two endured ridicule, whispers, and pointed questions whenever they stepped outside. They felt the sting of public disgrace. Yet, inside the hospital walls, something different happened. Parents clasped their hands in gratitude. Children called their names with affection. Slowly, shame gave way to pride, the kind born not from selling luxury, but from serving the vulnerable. When Prestige Motors finally shuttered its Detroit branch, Marcus Sterling stormed out in fury. To him, the hospital deliveries had been a publicity disaster. But Chad and Kevin stood silently outside, watching the lights of the dealership dim for the last time. "Funny," Chad murmured. "We thought this place was everything, but the kids, they're the real thing." Kevin nodded, fingering the friendship bracelet he still wore. "For once, I don't care about cars. I care about what they carry." That was the true downfall, not the loss of a dealership, nor the ruin of reputations, but the collapse of their old selves. Men who once measured worth in commission checks and swagger. Out of the ashes rose something Walter Brewster had known all along. Arrogance always crumbles, but service endures. And so, the arrogant salesman fell, not into disgrace alone, but into a new kind of humility, where every mile driven was an act of penance, and every child's smile was proof that redemption was possible. 6 months later, the new hospital wing stood finished, gleaming with glass and light, the Emily Brewster Children's Pavilion. Outside, banners fluttered in the spring air as families gathered for the dedication ceremony. The fleet of luxury cars that once symbolized pride and greed now lined the entrance, repurposed into gleaming transports for sick children and their parents. Walter Brewster, wearing a simple blazer and the Purple Heart pinned at his chest, stepped onto the stage. He did not speak of war or wealth. Instead, his voice carried the soft cadence of a father. "This building is not about me," he began. "It is about a little girl who once dreamed that no child should travel alone to their battles. My daughter, Emily, believed that courage was not only for soldiers, but for every child who wakes up fighting an illness. Today, her dream lives." The crowd listened in silence, many with tears in their eyes. Chad and Kevin stood among the volunteers, no longer in suits, but in hospital scrubs, each holding the hand of a child they had escorted. The journey from arrogance to service had remade them. Their smiles were humble, their voices gentle. They had found a purpose no paycheck could ever buy. After the ribbon was cut, Walter stepped down to greet the families. A small boy in a wheelchair rolled forward, clutching a toy Jeep. "Mr. Brewster," he whispered, "my mom said you're a hero. Is that true?" Walter knelt, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'm no hero," he said softly. "Heroes are the ones who keep fighting when it hurts. Heroes are children like you." A hush fell, followed by applause that rippled across the courtyard. It was not for the cars, not for the money, not even for Walter's medals. It was for the idea that sacrifice, love, and second chances could build something that would outlast all of them. As evening settled, Walter stood at the pavilion doors, watching parents and children stream inside. The glass reflected the last light of day, glowing like a beacon. For the first time since Emily's passing, he felt peace. He knew the scars of war and the ache of loss would never leave him, but he also knew they had given birth to something greater. Every engine that roared to life, every ride to the hospital, every laugh of a child in the back seat, these were Emily's echoes. Walter Brewster had not simply bought cars. He had bought hope. And that, he realized, was the most enduring investment of his life.